is this a feminist movie? And like, spoiler alert, no. But also there are moments that I think one could argue are. And so it's one of those like give with one hand and take with the other. Have you ever had something you love dismissed because it's just pop culture? What others might deem stupid shit, you know matters. You know it's worth talking and thinking about. And so do we. So come overthink with us as we delve into our deep thoughts about stupid shit. I'm Tracie Decker, and you're listening to Deep Thoughts About Stupid Shit, because pop culture is still culture, and shouldn't you know what's in your head? On today's episode, I'll be sharing my deep thoughts about the 1980s Ron Howard film Splash with my sister, Emily Guy Birkin, and with you. Let's dive in. All right, Em, I know you remember this film because we've talked about it a little bit, but tell me, what's in your head? What mental furniture do you have about Splash?
So I know that Splash is the reason why there are like 3 Madisons in my my kids' class. That name was not a name for a girl prior to, 1984, 85, whatever that was. I remember there's a point where Daryl Hannah's character, Madison, misses her mermaid self. And so she puts like Morton salt in a bath so she can have her tail. And that image really stuck with me. I remember her buying a huge fountain and putting it in his apartment. And then other than that, the thing that stuck with me from when I saw it for the very first time was John Candy's character would drop coins on the ground so that he could look up women's skirts. And I was so horrified by that. And the movie does not comment on it. So I kind of remember bits and pieces of the plot. Just, Daryl Hannah's a mermaid. She rescued Tom Hanks's character when he was a child, I think, when he almost drowned. And she comes back again now that he's an adult. And yeah, that's that. Oh, and Eugene Levy is like a cryptid researcher or something like that, or for the government. He's trying to prove that she's a mermaid. So
you remember a lot about this movie. Like, you remember a lot more about this movie than I did when I went in to watch it a couple days ago.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm impressed. So yeah, all of those things are right on. So what I want to talk about with you today are sort of the relationship between Daryl Hannah's Madison and Tom Hanks's Alan, and sort of why. Like, what's in it for her? Like, that's very unclear. And sort of like what that taught us about romance. I also want to talk about some of the tropes that are employed. So she is very much a Born Sexy Yesterday, also a bit of a manic pixie dream girl. I want to think about this in conversation a little bit with The Little Mermaid, which came about a decade later, because they're both loosely based on the Hans Christian Andersen, and they made different choices. And so I want to talk about some of those. I also want to talk about sort of consumerism in this film, and consumerism as a gendered kind of phenomenon.
Women be shopping kind of thing.
Yeah. And also, I want to sort of ask the question, like, is this a feminist movie? And like, spoiler alert, no. But also, there are moments that I think one could argue are. And so it's one of those, like, give with one hand and take with the other. So these are the buckets that I'm going to get into. And actually, before we hit record, you mentioned a potential interpretation that is fascinating to me that I want you to share. So before we get into all of that, let me see if I can do a plot synopsis. I'm not even going to say it. I'm just going to do my best. I'm not even going to say it's going to be brief because we all know it ain't.
We'll do what we can.
So I'll do my best. I will do my best. So the movie starts actually in black and white, like 20 years ago. We're on Cape Cod. We're on this ferry and we meet this family. So there's Teddy, who is an older brother. He's a little bit chubby, and like, the movie makes sure we see that he is chubby, and we see him dropping coins on the ground so he can look up women's skirts.
And even as a child.
As a child. Mm-hmm.
Ugh.
That's how we meet him. And then his mom is like, stop that. And then says to the dad, like, talk to him. And so the dad like smacks him on the top of the head. And she says, listen to your father, which actually is kind of funny.
Listen to the smack on the top of your head.
Yeah, exactly. So we know where they're in Cape Cod. They're in the waters of Cape Cod. And the younger brother, Alan, is sort of like dreamy and looking wistfully into the distance, and he doesn't want to go look at Cape Cod from the boat the way that with the rest of the family. And the mom is kind of like, well, if you change your mind, you know where we'll be. And then inexplicably, Alan is looking out at the water and jumps. And he sort of starts to sink. And he's meant to be about 8-ish. So like Teddy's like 10-ish. So he starts to sink, and then a blonde girl his age kind of smiles at him, and they're like holding hands and smiling at one another under the water. Meanwhile, the adults like, man overboard, and they like pull him out, and he's still gazing wistfully at the water. The boat kind of moves on, and this girl pokes her head up out of the water and like is tearfully looking at the boat going away. And then she dives and we see the fin. So it was a mer girl. Fast forward to present day, we meet Alan. He runs a fruit wholesaler. So we see him like on the docks with fruit and like arguing with different workers, like the delivery guy and a customer who owns a grocery store. Teddy pulls up, played by John Candy, in this sports car, and he like knocks over a stack of fruit. And we learn like he was playing poker and like made a deal for this crappy cherries that are rotting. And we sort of see that the dynamic of the like irresponsible older brother and I was going to say more responsible, and he is, but we didn't see that as a child. We just saw that he was kind of dreamy. Through the course of this, we learn that he's going to a wedding over the weekend from one of his employees. Alan, thanks. Okay. Tom Hanks' Alan is going to a wedding over the weekend from one of his employees. He's on the phone with his girlfriend, Veronica, who's like moving out. And he's trying to argue with her that she shouldn't move out. But we see only his side of the conversation where he's like, what do you mean, do I love you? I mean, I let you move in with me, didn't I? So he's like resistant to, like, she's looking for reassurance and he just can't give it. At the wedding, people keep asking him where Veronica is, and he gets increasingly short with them until one guy doesn't even ask, and he's just like, she's not coming, all right? She left me, all right?
and I imagine that, like, with Tom Hanks, because he's so charming.
Yeah.
And kind of adorable. And
he is, although it's funny because this character is not in that same way.
Yeah.
But, you know, so John Candy's Teddy is like, you might want to apologize. That was the bride's brother. So anyway, they end up at a bar after, and Alan gets increasingly drunk. Teddy like meets two women and is trying to like set up a thing where the four of them would go out, and Alan just doesn't want to. And so he goes out and he catches a cab, and he says to the cabbie, I want to go to Cape Cod. They're in New York City. And the cabbie's like, that's 300 miles. You got the cash? And he pulls out a wad of cash. So the cabbie takes him to Cape Cod. He gets off at the beach. We see him. He interacts with Eugene Levy for the first time. Eugene Levy's name is Walter Kornbluth. And he is, as you say,
that is a perfect name.
Yeah. As you say, some sort of researcher. By the way, Eugene Levy got way better looking as he got older. Just for the record.
It was those eyebrows. Like, they needed to be a little bit gray, I think.
And like he tamed his hair a bit. I don't know. Like, I think he's like an attractive man now. Yeah. Not like hot, but like attractive. But he was not as a young man. Anyway, sorry. Total aside. So he is a researcher of some kind, and we see him sort of berating the locals whose boat he's hired. Alan is like, comes up to him on the beach and is like, I'm on the wrong side of the island. Like, I want to be over there. Can you guys take me? And Levy's like super suspicious. Like, who sent you? Did Dr. So-and-so send you? You're a spy. And Alan's like, what? Like, he's like still in his tuxedo, in his like morning coat from the wedding. Anyway, he ends up hiring a guy in this tiny motorboat, and the guy's name is like Fat Eddie or something. And the boat stops working midway. We've learned that Alan can't actually swim. Alan ends up getting knocked out. Fat Eddie jumps into the water because the engine's not working. He's going to go get the other boat, the smaller boat. By the way, this is a tiny boat. And so eventually Alan ends up in the water. He gets knocked out by the boat because he's managed to make the engine work again, but then fill out and it goes in a circle, blah, blah, blah. So he's sort of sinking down. Enter Daryl Hannah as a mermaid. She rescues him. We watch his wallet fall out of his pants and drop down. She takes him to the beach, and it's the same sort of like, just like the Little Mermaid, like he wakes up in the sand and sees her from a distance. She kind of like peeks up over some rocks at him. She's naked with legs. And he's like, hey, who are you? Did you save me? What's going on? And like, we don't know what her motivation is, but she just looks sort of scared a little bit. But she sort of runs up to him, gives him a kiss, not a peck, and runs into the surf. And he's like, wait, where, whatever, weird. So we watch her retrieve his wallet and then go to a shipwreck where she pulls a map off the wall, like a rolled map of New York, because she's looked at his ID that has a New York address, and she smiles at us.
So she can read English.
I guess. So he goes back to his life and like, whatever, we see him with in the fruit business, and there's a couple unnecessary sort of comic things and whatever. And then we see we're at the Statue of Liberty, and Madison walks up out of the surf completely naked onto Liberty, the Statue of Liberty Island. And she gets arrested for being naked in a public park or whatever. Cut back to Alan. He gets a call from the cops because she still has his wallet on her. And they're like, a naked woman is here. Do you know this person? He's like, yes, I do. So he rushes to find her. They see one another. She kisses him again, not a peck. This is not a chaste kiss that she gives him. He takes her home, and like, she's not speaking, and like, but it's clear they've had it, like, they make it clear they have sex. He has to go to work. Yeah. And we don't see it. It's not on screen. But yeah. There's still no question.
I mean,
no
and
question.
I guess like you can have consent without.
Oh, no, there's no question that she consents. She's sort of pursuing him. Gotcha. Like, she is very aggressive with the non-chaste touch.
I'm just thinking, like, if this were a real woman who didn't, like, there's just... Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So he goes to work and leaves her with the TV. And so she's watching TV and, like, learns English from watching TV. I don't know. But we see her sort of say the word Bloomingdale's because she's watching a bunch of advertisements. So the next thing we see, she's wearing one of his suits. I don't know how she tied the tie, but she's wearing one of his suits. She goes out there's a doorman at this apartment building where Alan lives. And he says, "Where to, miss?" And she says, "Bloomingdale's." This is the first word we've heard her say. So she goes to Bloomingdale's. She's immediately met by, like, she's like in awe, like looking around because, she was born sexy yesterday in this giant, department store. And immediately a saleswoman, like very New York accent, is like comes up to her and is like, "Oh, this isn't working. Like, this outfit isn't working. Let's see if we can get you something that fits you. You're such a pretty girl." And then this saleswoman, who's like middle-aged, late 40s, early 50s, says something like a skinny girl like you. I don't know if she used the word skinny, actually. I think she said pretty. "You should be in different things. I have a dress. I couldn't get one leg in it. My daughter's lucky. She's anorexic." And it was played for laughs. Yeah. So we see she does a lot of shopping. Presumably she took Alan's credit card. I don't know. But she's got bags and bags and bags, and she's wearing different clothes. She ends up in the TV department of the department store and is watching the TVs and aerobicizing with Richard Simmons. And Alan comes home from work. She's not in the apartment. And so he, the doorman says where she went. He goes to Bloomingdale's. He finds her in the TV place. And the two sales guys in the TV section of Bloomingdale's are like, "She's been here for 6 hours. And she kind of has to go home. We're closing." And anyway, Alan and Madison, that's not her name yet, are talking. And he says that she doesn't speak English to these two sales guys. And then she says, "Hi, Alan. How are you? I hope you had a nice day." So they start talking and he's like, could you speak English? Why didn't you talk before? And she's like, well, I didn't know it. I learned it from watching TV. And he's like, well, what's your name? And she said, well, it's hard to say in English. And he said, well, just say it in your language. And she like squeaks this like super high pitched like dolphin kind of whistles that like busts all the TVs in the room. They're walking away from the store and they're talking about their days. And she's total combination manic pixie dream, born sexy yesterday, like taking her shoes off while they're walking on the street, like reacting to all these things, like, oh, look at this, look at that, and like almost gets hit by a car, and like one of the drivers is like, you should put her on a leash, which ugh. And then she climbs up on a street pole and points at the walk sign, is like, pretty, so that Alan's like, well, I guess I've never thought about it, but I guess it's pretty. He says, we need a name for you that I can actually pronounce. What do you think? And she's like, well, what are they? And he was like, well, there's millions of names. And he starts sort of listing names. And he says, where are we? Oh, Madison. He's looking at the street sign. And she says, oh, I like that name. He says, that's not a name, which is really funny from your recollection. And she like gets crestfallen. So he's like, no, it's a lovely name. You know what? It's a great name. So that's her name. So the thing that you remember with the bathtub, that scene is very memorable because the sort of above view of Daryl Hannah in the tail, like stretched out in this tub, is visually very striking. The scene is also really striking. She's in the tub. He wakes up and is like, wonders where she is and comes to find her. And he says, what are you doing? She says, taking a bath. He said, can I come in? She says, no. And he's like, why? What's the matter? And he actually is like, I'm going to bust down this door. And she's like, don't come in, don't come in. And he actually busts down the door while she's like trying to dry off. Because apparently the magic is that when she's wet, she has a tail. By the time he gets...
Doesn't have to be salt water or something?
No.
Okay.
She does put salt. You were right that she does put salt into the tub, but it does not need to be salt water.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that moment where there's a woman in the bathroom saying, don't come in, and he like busts down the door, is not the charming Tom Hanks that I know and love. Like it's kind of disturbing, and she's upset. And then finally, when he does get in, she has legs again. And so she's sort of lying on the floor, like looking up at him. And he was like, what is going on? And she was like, I was shy. And he says, shy after what happened in the car and the elevator and the, like implying all the sex they've had. And she's like, yeah, I was shy. And like that moment stood out to me in a way in this viewing that I don't think it did in the past.
Yeah. If he thought that she was ill or something?
I think that is what he thinks something is wrong.
Yeah.
But I don't think he has any reason to believe she's in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, needing space and privacy?
Yeah.
Especially since they've known each other for a matter of days?
Yeah.
Ugh. Anyway, so shenanigans ensue. We see, it's not exactly a montage, but it's kind of a montage of like Eugene Levy has figured out who she is and is trying to like get her wet in public. That is not a euphemism. Like he's literally trying to get water on her.
Considering what you said about, how he has aged like fine wine,
yeah,
it was a little bit more difficult back then.
So he's trying to like get water on her, and he keeps mistaking another woman for her. And so we see him, he gets like beat up repeatedly.
Oh, that's right. Doesn't he end up with like a neck brace?
A neck brace and like one arm in a, in a hard cast. Yes. Meanwhile, we see them, Alan and Madison, like doing stuff together. So like they go for a walk and they see the fountain that you remember with the mermaid that he says he's always liked. And she's like, why? And he's like, I don't know. When I was a kid, something happened and I don't know. And she says, oh, I remember. And he's like, what? And she's like, oh, what's the English word? I meant I understand. Like that's how she covers it. And he tells her that park is being dismantled to make room for apartments or something. So she does end up buying this giant fountain and putting it in his apartment. She buys it with her necklace. We see in the beginning she's wearing this like fancy mermaid necklace. She has said from the very beginning, she has 1 week and then she has to go home, because if she doesn't go home after a week, she can't ever go home. So their week is almost up. He thinks it's an immigration thing. They're ice skating and ice skating? Yeah, ice skating. And he asks her to marry him so that she can stay. And she's like, no. And he does not handle it well. So they end up kind of running off in separate directions, and it's raining. So she ends up sort of hiding under a bridge for a while to avoid the rain. The next morning, she comes and finds him at the fruit seller place where he works and says yes. And he's super excited. They're actually going to drive to Maryland because you don't need it. Or he suggests they drive to Maryland because they don't need a blood test in Maryland. But he has this event to go to. It's a dinner where the president is speaking. So he's taking her instead of Teddy. So they go to this thing, and Eugene Levy's Dr. Kornbluth is there. And this time, Kornbluth manages to get water on her as they're leaving. And they get...
I can remember she's like in an evening gown or something like that. And then she has a tail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's sort of looking up at him from the ground, and he just looks sort of stricken, and they get pulled apart by like the crowd and like the government sort of agent sort of thing, like come and like bundle her into like an SUV, and she's screaming. She's like yelling his name the whole time. Next we see they're both in a research facility. He's in water up to his neck, like naked except for like medical things, and like covering his genitals with his hands, going, "I'm not a fish." The scientists are like, he's been in there 12 hours and no change. I think maybe he's just a man. And then they decide to try interaction. So they bring her in a sling and drop her into the same tank he's in. And he's like, "So this was your big secret?" And she's like, "Yeah, I was gonna tell you, don't be mad." And he's mad. So she kind of like sinks down to the bottom of the tank and like just looks forlorn. They pull him out. They keep her. He has this conversation with his brother where he's like, "Do you believe it? Like, I can't fall in love. I thought there was something wrong with me, and I finally fall in love, and she's a fish." And his brother's like, "What is wrong with you?"
Which is a funny line.
Yeah.
I fall in love and she's a fish.
Yeah.
It's kind of a funny line.
So John Candy's Teddy's like, "What is wrong with you? Do you remember how happy she made you? Like, very few people get to be that happy. I'll never get to be that happy." And that sort of like gets through to him. So he wants to try and find her, but he can't. Meanwhile, we see Dr. Kornbluth, who is being completely belittled by the other scientists. And we see he's in the room where she's in the tank, and the lead scientist is saying, like, tomorrow we'll take a look at her pulmonary and reproductive systems. Like, he makes it clear he's going to kill her and dissect her. And Kornbluth is like, maybe we shouldn't do that? Like, and she's, meanwhile, like, her tail is kind of like flaking. Like, she's clearly unwell and miserable. And we see Kornbluth like regret what has happened. So Kornbluth teams up with Alan and Teddy to rescue her. There's some silly shenanigans where they pretend to be Swedish scientists that are ridiculous, and they manage to get her out, and they're like running away, and they think they got away with it, but they definitely didn't. And then the entire force of the U.S. military is sort of chasing them. They're on a pier in New York Harbor and sort of embracing, and he's like, "You got to go. They're never going to stop chasing you. You got to go." And she says, "Well, you could come with me." And he's like, "I can't." And she said, "No, don't you remember when you were a kid and you were safe with me? I can do that for you." And he's initially isn't going to. She dives in and is sort of flying swimming. There's like a helicopter circling. And I don't remember, now that I'm telling you the story, exactly what it is that convinces him to follow her. But I think there's a moment where he is convinced, but he does. He follows her, and they kiss underwater, and now I guess he can breathe. And Army, Navy, scuba divers are like jumping in after them to like try and grab her. And she turns out to be like a total badass and like kicks all their asses. And then they swim off together in New York Harbor that like has coral and like beautiful fish and no trash. So
see, that is the most unrealistic aspect of this entire film.
Yeah. Yeah. So they basically swim off into the sunset together, and that's the end. So I'll start with the easy. This does not pass the Bechdel test. I'm sure you could guess that. I mean, Madison does speak to the Bloomingdale's assistant or the Bloomingdale salesperson, not about boys or men, but she doesn't have a name. The Bloomingdale's person does not have a name. There is at least one other named character, Mrs. Stimler, who's like the receptionist, Alan's receptionist, but she never speaks to another woman. So it doesn't pass Bechdel. So that's easy. And a reminder, listeners, the Bechdel test from Alison Bechdel, other at least two named female characters, do they speak to one another, and do they speak to one another about something other than a boy or a man? The answer is, from the very first question, is no. Well, no, I guess it's from the second question is no. But let's stay with gender for a moment. So I remembered when I went into watching this movie, I didn't have a lot of the things that you actually had in your head. I just remembered sort of a fun rom-com. And I remember kind of wanting to be Madison.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And watching it now, it is so unclear why she wants this dude. Like, it is remarkable that he shows up again after 20 years. So maybe in a generous read, I could give that as like, she's like, oh, well, it must be because this guy I saw when we were kids just showed up again and I saved him again. So maybe there's something that I should find out.
Is there supposed to be this kind of fairy tale like insta love where like they became soulmates for each other?
Yes.
In that very beginning?
Yes. Yes. I think there is meant to be a soulmate kind of a connection between them. Yes. And
which would explain why he struggles to commit to Veronica.
Because his soulmate is a mermaid.
Yeah.
Yes. That is a generous read. I do appreciate that. And also, not really helpful for like little baby Tracie and Emily, like trying to figure out what romance should look like.
Yeah.
Or could look like. Like, it doesn't do what the Disney version of Little Mermaid does, where she gives up her voice in order to be with a man. It does not require her to give up her entire world in order to be with him. In fact, the other way around, he gives up his. And even from the beginning, she has said from the beginning, I have a week. She never intended to leave her life for him. It was always sort of a visit and not like a permanent stay. It's also pretty sex positive. Like she definitely leads.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So those things all feel like pretty good.
As you were describing it, I was thinking like, how much more interesting would this movie be if it were from Madison's point of view?
Exactly. Like that's the thing that Disney gave us that this didn't, right? Because Disney gave it to us from Ariel's point of view. Like Eric, we only see Eric when Ariel's with him, mostly. But in this case, actually, we follow Alan. We have no idea what she's been doing for the past 20 years. We have no idea what her life is like underwater. And I think it would be a lot more interesting. I mean, like, again, because it is from Alan's point of view, watching it now, I'm like, well, this is pretty clearly a male fantasy, right? In fact, one of the commentators that I read was like, I was a little surprised to read that this was written when the screenwriter was 33, because it reads like something when he was about half that age. And I was like, yeah right on. It's kind of right. You know, it's just this gorgeous woman wants only you and travels 300 miles underwater to find you and just wants to find you and have sex with you. Like, it's just
nice work if you can get it.
Yeah. And like, why did I identify with Madison? Like, what?
Because she's a kick-ass tail. I mean, oh my God, I wanted a mermaid tail.
Yeah. So that said, like, this is clearly a masturbatory fantasy. I think Ron Howard, in some ways, the camera mostly avoids. Daryl Hannah's bare-breasted many scenes. The camera mostly avoids her breasts. There is one scene, like when she's walking on the Statue of Liberty Island, where we not zoom in, but like definitely clearly look at her ass. But for the most part, she's not objectified in some of the ways that one might expect from this masturbatory fantasy story. And then she learns about how to be a human woman by watching TV and by shopping And there's a degree to which we're like with this Born Sexy Yesterday and the Manic Pixie Dream that we are meant to like really, this form of femininity that she takes on, we're meant to really like. Like we're meant to identify and like just fall in love. We are also meant to fall in love with her, right? Not just Alan. And so I'm like holding all of this tension that just feels like I'm holding my love for Daryl Hannah's character from when I was
tiny,
right? What was I, 8 in 84? While also all of the sludge that she brought with her from the bottom of the sea.
You know, what's interesting, because like the fact that she is able to pick up English in like 12 hours.
Right.
That is phenomenal.
Right.
Intelligence. And just imagine if the TV had been set to C-SPAN.
Right.
Or like instead of Home Shopping Channel or whatever it was.
Right.
Like that's like, so it's understandable that she would take on the trappings of what she's seeing. But it's offered to us as if this is how it is to be feminine, rather than this is one of the ways to be feminine.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So all of that at the same time. Another and is, so I named this as a masturbatory male fantasy, right? This gorgeous blonde who travels 300 miles to have sex with you. At the same time, she saves him repeatedly. In many ways, he is a damsel in distress, both as a child and then when she first saves him after when he loses his wallet, and even sort of metaphorically, because we see him sort of stuck in this kind of rigidity of the work and of kind of bureaucracy. Like even when he talks about getting married, it's all about the bureaucracy, about immigration,
Maryland,
and the blood tests. Yeah. And her kind of wide-eyed Born Sexy Yesterday, like the wisdom of that trope, because that trope also has the wisdom with it, also is sort of saving him from the numbness of the bureaucracy and the rigidity. And he does save her from Eugene Levy's colleagues.
Yeah.
But not particularly effectively. Right? She wouldn't have gotten away if she weren't also a badass. Because she ends up like literally knocking out all of these scuba diving, I don't know, government actors. I don't know if they're supposed to be police or Navy or what.
Which is another reason why it would be so much more interesting from her point of view. And because when you were talking about how she was looking at like the walk sign and going pretty, I was thinking like, wouldn't it be interesting to see Alan's reaction to things that are mundane in the sea?
Yeah.
Because he would go, oh, pretty about something. And she would be like, no, that's just our thing. Well, I guess it is pretty. Come to think of it, I don't really think about it that way because it's just part of my normal life, you know? And so we could have like the Born Sexy Yesterday man fish out of water. That would be fascinating. It would be really fascinating.
Splash 2.
I think there is a sequel.
Is there?
Yeah. I think it was like straight to video bullshit.
Yeah.
So one thing that I was thinking about when you're describing the scene in the bathtub, and in particular, because you're saying this is kind of in conversation with The Little Mermaid. So we talked during the Little Mermaid episode about how I really shied away from The Little Mermaid once I had the realization of like how anti-feminist it was. She gives up her voice for a man. And then I was able to forgive the film when I learned that many, many trans kids of our generation and younger saw it as an allegory for themselves. And so I'm thinking about when she's like, no, it's okay, don't come in. That sounds like how it would feel for a non-binary intersex person who is not ready to come out.
Or anyone who has body dysmorphia and is not in their not wearing the trappings of their actual gender, not their biological sex.
There's an episode of Everybody Loves Raymond where Deborah is freaking out at Ray because he's trying to get into the bathroom or something like that. It's basically about the fact that she doesn't feel like she has privacy, and she's like bleaching her mustache or something along those lines. So like even cisgendered women feeling the need to keep up the trappings of...
Well, I mean, that is bleaching a cis woman bleaching her mustache is gender affirming care. Let's be real. Let's be clear here.
Yeah. Or even, like I don't personally know, but I know of women who like get up early so that their husbands or live-in boyfriends don't see them without makeup.
Yeah, the fabulous Mrs. Maisel, we see that happen where she sets an alarm before his so that she can put makeup on before her husband wakes up.
That to me, I think is really interesting because since we're seeing this from Alan's point of view, it's like he's worried, so he breaks the door down, but he doesn't have any reason to actually be worried. He's actually suspicious.
Right.
And we're shown he has a right to be suspicious because she was keeping something from him. But what she's keeping from him is that who she is.
She's a fish.
She's a fish. That I find really interesting thinking about it also because you could see this as a trans allegory as well, where I finally fall in love and she's a man.
Yeah.
And John Candy going like, are you crazy? What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
You've never been happier than you were with Madison.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. That's nice. Yeah.
Which, that can improve this movie a little bit if you think about it.
Totally. I mean, even Walter Kornbluth's kind of redemption.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Because the reason that he changes his tune is because he finally has empathy for Madison. He was kind of the laughingstock of the scientific community, which is why it became such a mission for him to prove that she existed, because people were like, what is wrong with you? Like, go find us a unicorn. So he was being really belittled by the scientific community, but he became obsessed to sort of clear his name without thinking about the effect that it would have on Madison. He was not thinking of Madison as a person. And when he started thinking of her as a person, he actually risked a lot, like everything, like not just his scientific career, but he risks himself at one point to try and slow down the army guys. He's like standing in the street trying to like stop a truck. So,
I mean, if we take the trans allegory a little bit further, I'm thinking about there are people who are like just icky about trying to prove that, someone is hiding something. So I'm thinking of Lady Gaga. Early on in her career, people would say Lady Gaga has a penis, and she refused to respond to it. And someone asked her about it because they like, you could just very easily deny it. And she's like, why would I deny something that's not shameful? Like, it doesn't matter, like, And so I'm thinking like, if we look at this as an allegory and like Eugene Levy's character recognizing like, this doesn't matter. This is a person who is hurting.
Right.
And that's, I don't know, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
In the midst of this male masturbatory fantasy.
Yeah. With these hints of feminist take on it, I mean, even like one of the ways in which this version differs from Disney's Little Mermaid, like part of the sort of hiding thing in Disney's Little Mermaid is with Sebastian, and like she's kind of horrified by the eating crabs and lobster and stuff. In Splash, they go out to dinner and they order lobster, and she like just picks up the lobster and starts chewing on bites through the shell. And it's like, like she's like nom, nom, nom without opening it, And she looks up and like the entire restaurant is watching. And she's like, oh, this is how we eat lobster where I'm from. So, which is like really funny. And also like, well, I think both of the films kind of, with the Born Sexy Yesterday, both of these mermaid films that I'm talking about, with the Born Sexy Yesterday, give us some things that are like not feminine or sort of not coded like delicate, right? Like Ariel brushes her hair with a fork. And we know why, but like, and like Madison like just goes to town on this lobster, which is like not feminine. It's not a feminine way to eat in the way that we are taught to think about femininity. I feel like that's an interesting tension. She still is his dream girl, even though she eats lobster like that. And he doesn't know she's a fish yet.
Yeah.
When he's like, oh, I don't care about that. It's fine. Yeah. It doesn't matter. So like so much from our childhood. It does like give with one hand and take with the other. I feel like it takes more than it gives, but it's not like it only takes, right? I think there are some films we watch where it's just like, yeah, we don't need to rewatch this one. I don't feel that way quite with this, though I wouldn't want my daughter to watch it without talking to me at the same time. Like there's just a lot about gender roles and sort of relationship roles. Like aside from the sort of soulmate thing, it's really not clear what she gets from Alan. Like, what does he give her emotionally? Sex is what he gives her, that's another interesting question. Like now that they're going to live in her world where she's got a tail, presumably they're not having intercourse in the traditional way that he's used to,
unless they go onto islands. Like,
I guess, yeah, I guess. Anyway, sorry. That maybe is unnecessary speculation.
Well, it is like, because one of the things about these sorts of films is anytime you have like a paranormal creature, so like, you know, vampires in Twilight, a mermaid and a human. If it's a paranormal creature and a human, the options are that the human becomes the paranormal creature where you make the girl the vampire, or the paranormal creature becomes human where the mermaid becomes a human woman. And this is like, there's something subversive in the fact that this turns that on its head.
Totally. I do think that like both of the Anderson and of the other versions that we then get later, like even the fairy tale, like the fairy tale always asks the woman, or always sort of gives us the woman leaving her life behind to join his. And that is not what happens in this film.
Or the vampire stories, the love stories that I have actually enjoyed are ones where they part,
right?
Because it can't happen. Or I've read one or two where the vampire is able to become human again, but even then I'm sitting there going like, you've been around for 300 years, like becoming human again is not going to appeal. You know? So yeah, there's something very like subversive about that making that choice, but it would be so much more interesting.
Yeah.
And then we'd also know what's in it for Madison.
Yeah.
Because, you know, like, okay, maybe he's her manic pixie dream boy for whatever reason, you know, but we don't know why. We don't see it.
No, we really don't. We don't. I mean, like, the only thing that we really see is that like he likes mermaids. because of the fountain. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, before we hit record, you told me about like an interpretation of this that I hadn't seen that is really fascinating. Can you share that with me?
So it's a fan theory that I know about because of a crack.com video, which I'll find and link in the show notes, that suggests that the story of this film is actually the fantasy of Alan as he's drowning, as he's dying. Because it points out that like he nearly drowned the first time he met her. And so like there's something wrong that he's going back to this place where he had this horrific near drowning and he's never learned to swim, right?
Right. He does not know how to swim.
Does not know how to swim. So, and we see that his life is kind of falling apart up until that point. And so if we think about it that way, it makes more sense that the story is actually just this like the random firing neurons of someone as they die.
Yeah, like in Cape Cod when he loses his wallet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he like none of it actually happens after that. He actually drowns and he comes up with this idea of being saved by this beautiful woman. And then like that's why it feels like a male fantasy, because it is. It's his fantasy of how he could survive this horrible accident.
That actually makes a lot more sense than that this is magical realism. I mean, honestly, like even just the fact that she finds him again is just, it just doesn't.
Yeah, there's like,
I mean, you just have to hit the I believe button. So,
like, okay, so she can read his driver's license, but she doesn't speak English.
Right.
You know, and she knows enough about humans to know to find a map.
Right.
Shipwreck.
Right. Which presumably she's seen before, but like still like, yeah, it's
that she's able to figure out.
And then swims from the waters of Cape Cod to New York Harbor.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And doesn't die of like, I don't know, sludge poisoning or whatever.
Well, like, you know, New York Harbor is, you know, gorgeous. And
yeah. I think it was filmed, like I was looking at the end, it was filmed on location in New York, LA, and Nassau, the Bahamas. I think the water, like I think the New York Harbor underwater scenes are actually Nassau.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, and that's like, I think that interpretation, it makes sense and like contextualizes all the stuff that doesn't really fit.
Yep. Totally.
And then also helps clarify why all these things are just like, yeah, that's this beautiful naked woman has shown up. You know her? Yes, I do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So I really enjoy those kinds of interpretations. I find it really interesting to kind of think through what is actually happening here if you don't want to suspend your disbelief.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah. So those are the things I wanted to share with you. So let me reflect back and you'll fill in where I miss. So the number one thing that I like when I finished watching it, I watched with my spouse. My spouse said, I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this because they were enjoying the movie. And I was like, oh, you're not going to like it. You are not going to like it. That was a total male fantasy, like from beginning to end. And that really is what stood out the most to me in rewatching this film is just like, as this reviewer that I read said, like, the guy who wrote it was 33, but he was tapped into his like 16-year-old self, right? That there's this
like
gorgeous,
Luc Besson and,
totally
the
Luc
Fifth
Besson
Element.
and the Fifth Element. Yep. And in many ways, some of the same things from Luc Besson and the Fifth Element with this gorgeous supernatural creature who just wants to be with you.
Mm-hmm. And is a total badass and saves you.
Total badass in many, many ways. And you are mediocre in
Total
most ways. So that really is what stood out the most. In terms of some of the literary analysis, it does not pass Bechdel. I think mostly it is an anti-feminist film, though there are a few feminist moments, especially when we put it in conversation with other interpretations of the Hans Christian Andersen mermaid tale. In particular, the fact that at the end, instead of, well, in Andersen, like she does not end up with the man. She gains a soul and then dies. But in the Disney version that comes about 10 years after Splash, she gets the guy, but she has to give up her entire life and identity in order to be with him and can never go home again. In this version, the opposite happens, and the human man gives up his identity and his whole world in order to be with her. So some of the tropes we see are Born Sexy Yesterday, again, a repeat of Luc Besson's Fifth Element. And along with the Born Sexy Yesterday, these often go together, is a manic pixie dream girl. And we see that in the ways that both a wisdom and an intelligence, like this woman learned another language by watching TV in a matter of hours.
And not just another language. This isn't like it's a language that is complete. It's a different species language.
Yeah.
You know,
because she speaks like a dolphin. We learn.
She speaks whale.
And now she speaks English
and
with zero accent.
Yeah. As impressive as it would be for like an English speaker to learn Japanese, at least they share the same
phonemes.
Phonemes. Yeah,
so,
phonemes. They form sounds in the same way.
Right. So this like brilliant creature who also like looks at the walk sign on the street and is like pretty, you know. So that's how we sort of see that manifest, both the Born Sexy Yesterday and the Manic Pixie Dream. You know, she's taking her shoes off to walk barefoot and like she's just making him get back in touch with his childlike self. She saves him literally from drowning, both when he's a child and then now as an adult. And she saves him from the numbing and the sort of loveless, rigid, bureaucratic life that he's in, where he's just cleaning up messes. That's all he does. He cleans up messes for a living with this fruit wholesaler. In terms of gender, we see she learns English by watching TV, and it's just like broadcast TV with lots of commercials. And so she learns to be a woman by being a consumer. And there's no critique of that. The movie does not critique that in any way. And so it's not even that I think that it's like not the way it might happen if someone were dropped into our world from outside all of a sudden. It's that, can we problematize it a little bit? And we don't at all. It's just like, we don't even problematize my daughter's lucky she's anorexic.
Yeah.
Like, it's just played for laughs.
Yeah.
likewise with Teddy's dropping coins on the ground to look up women's skirts. Like, we are meant to find that, like,
oh, Teddy,
boys will be boys.
Yeah.
Is the way I think we're meant to react to that. Not in a like, ew, you need to be taken off the streets. Like, so.
Which is how baby Emily reacted to that. Like, I remember there was 10 years between when I saw it when I was like, I don't know, 5, 6, and then saw it again as in my mid-teens. And that was what stuck with me for those 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's gross. It's gross. And he does it as a 10-year-old and then he does it again as a 30-year-old. Ugh. We do hear Alan say, you know, it was funny when you were 10. And Teddy says, I find something that works for me and I stick with it. Again, boys will be boys. Ugh. Gross. You brought in sort of, because of The Little Mermaid, you kind of asked the question, like, what if this were a trans allegory? And I think there is something that's makes this much more palatable if I think of it that way. And you also brought in this fan theory about the whole film after he gets hit in the head while he's in the water is actually his fantasy as he dies, which again, like, now that's an interesting film. Now it's an interesting film. So those are some of the things. Let me see. Was there anything else that I said?
We talked a little bit about how much more interesting this would be if it were from Madison's point of view, and if we got to see Alan reacting to his new world.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I guess just to reiterate, I've already said it, but like, it's really unclear what's in this relationship for Madison. So, yeah, I'm probably not going to need to watch this one again. So, I mean, it's not one that I'm like, don't watch it, but
it's not Revenge of the Nerds.
Yeah, it's not Revenge of the Nerds, but neither is it like Stand By Me.
Stand By Me.
Like, oh, I want to see that. So, anyway, next weekend, you're bringing me some deep thoughts?
Yeah, I'm bringing you my deep thoughts about the Dark Crystal.
Oh, another Henson property.
We love the Muppets. All right, see you then.
This show is a labor of love, but that doesn't make it free to produce. If you enjoy it even half as much as we do, please consider helping to keep us overthinking. You can support us at our Patreon. There's a link in the show notes. Or leave a positive review so others can find us. And of course, share the show with your people. Thanks for listening. Our theme music is Professor Umlaut by Kevin MacLeod from Incompetech.com. Find full music credits in the show notes.
Thank you to Resonate Recordings for editing today's episode.
Until next time, remember, pop culture is still culture. And shouldn't you know what's in your head?